Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the final symposium panel in this Adirondacks for All Identity and Environmental Justice series. This series has been jointly presented by the Adirondack Experience, the Adirondack Diversity Initiative, the Wild Center, and the Nature Conservancy. Just a quick reminder for those who were unable to attend the previous symposium panels, but this past summer, the Adirondacks for All program series opened space for dialogue around topics including historical preservation, social justice, climate change, and environmental policy. The symposium has featured roundtable discussions that build on those conversations and provide further opportunities for public engagement with critical issues that have relevance well beyond the Adirondacks. Project collaborators approach the Adirondacks for All initiative as a long-term endeavor to work towards a more inclusive, accessible, and protected Adirondack Park. The symposium concludes this evening with an exploration of recent efforts by policymakers and environmental nonprofits to make the Adirondacks a more accessible and inclusive space. My name is Eric Reardon. I'm the project director, and I'd like to start this evening's program by acknowledging that the Adirondack Experience is situated on the Aboriginal territories of the Mohawk and Abenaki people. Indigenous people continue to live in this region and practice their teachings and lifeways. This roundtable discussion, entitled Using Policy and Preservation to Foster an Adirondacks for All, features a conversation between Mair, Assemblywoman Stefani Zimmerman, Assemblywoman Michelle C, and Benita Law-Diao. Mair is a 30-year wilderness expert and environmental justice pioneer, and a former advisor to the White House Commission for Environmental Quality for the Clinton and Obama administrations. Mair was the first African-American president of the Sierra Club and is well known for his work in environmental justice. Assemblywoman Stefani Zimmerman was elected to the 56th District in New York State Assembly on November 3rd, 2020, to represent the historic neighborhoods of Bedford-Stuyvesant and Crown Heights in Brooklyn. She joined the legislature as an experienced government and nonprofit and small business professional who has pioneered efforts in workforce development and healthy aging initiatives. Stefani is a tireless advocate for civil rights and justice and champions education access, food justice, housing stability, and maternal health. As a Silver Life member and member at large of the Brooklyn NAACP, she continuously promotes voting rights and is a recognized leader in voter education, engagement, and registration. Assemblywoman Michelle C was elected to represent the 22nd Assembly District in 2012 and is the first person of Haitian descent to be elected into the New York State Legislature. She currently serves as the Assembly Deputy Majority Leader, as well as the chair of the New York State Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus. Through her work, she strives to ensure that all people are treated with dignity and protected equally under the law throughout New York State. Assemblywoman Solage has continued to advocate for Nassau County's middle class and small businesses by fighting for property tax relief, equitable state funding of schools, and increased public transportation services on Long Island. We are grateful to have again with us Benita Law-Diao, who is a New York State licensed public health nutritionist, dietitian, and served for 32 years with the New York State Department of Health. Throughout her life, Ms. Law-Diao has held a strong passion for the environment and for sustainable living, which included serving as the outdoor Afro leader for Albany and upstate New York. She's a member of the Albany Riverfront Collaborative and works to forge robust civic partnerships necessary to nurture a river-connected and sustaining community with a vibrant and interdependent economy, culture, and landscape. In May 2022, Ms. Law-Diao was appointed to the Adirondack Park Agency, the first African-American to serve on the board. Throughout this evening's presentation, I would invite all of our audience members to please feel free to submit any questions they may have through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And at this point, I'd like to turn the program over to Mair.
Thank you very much, Eric. Welcome everyone this evening, and my honored and esteemed panelists. My name is Mair. I am the Wilderness Campaign Director for the Adirondack Council's Forever Adirondack Coalition. and campaign. One of the things that we are in charge and tasked with, all of us, is to protect this wonderful national treasure that we all enjoy right now. We must not only preserve it, protect it now for current generations, but also for the future. It is indeed an honor to work and serve as a volunteer, our public and our environment in this wonderful, glorious space we call the Adirondacks, our shared greater community, our shared greater green space. And I want to thank you all for being here today and enjoying us this evening. Panel, welcome.
Thank you.
I know that Benita's over at Yale, and Benita, by the way, she is one of the appointees to the Adirondack Park Agency, which is one of the critical policy making bodies for land use within the Adirondacks. But again, we have our wonderful downstate legislators, but also Assemblywoman Michelle C is the chairwoman of the New York State Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Caucus, which is, as they say, one of the most significant caucuses in that it represents about 80% of the state's population through its robust and diverse members of leaders that are part of that body. And I again want to thank you all there. I will put this up in general. If you can all speak to over the past few years, your experience with the Adirondacks, but more importantly, its role based upon your recent understanding of its legacy, its heritage, as it intersects with communities of color, but also as a unique place and space that we must protect for all New Yorkers. And I'll put that up there for all of you. Assemblywoman Zimmerman.
Okay, I'll start us off. Well, thank you, and it is wonderful to be in your presence again. Whenever I hear your voice, I automatically think about the pristine waters and skies of the Adirondacks, and the twice now that we've had the opportunity to visit and just explore this national treasure. I think today's webinar is just so uniquely placed from my point of view. It is 3-4 days before the general election, and everybody has voting on their mind. And when I think about Timbuctoo and the purpose of that naming of that space to ensure that African Americans had the right to vote. And then the connection to Weeksville, which is in my district, which was also established to ensure that African Americans had the right to vote and protect their rights and begin educating their families and the community, teaching them their history, giving them a sense of place and self-agency. The fact that these two communities are going to be connected with this project is just phenomenal. And I thank you for all of your efforts. But I think that we all know that it is a time as we look at our rights being eroded, at our history being erased through the banning of books and other measures. It is so important that we are here to tell this story and to create new spaces in existing spaces that were before and will continue to be sovereign land for people of color. So that's the intersection for me today. And of course, you know, environmental rights being one that we've always been impacted by, and to have the opportunity to ensure that the next generation is going to make sure that we can live in a healthy planet, because we're going to teach them all that they need to know, is just the perfect intersection of this work that we're going to be doing together.
Assemblymember Solages.
Yeah, and just to echo that, as the caucus, and just to give some background, the caucus usually does an annual retreat, and every year the annual retreat is basically, in Albany. which is not really, to me, a retreat. Retreat is rest, relaxation, and, exploring new things. And so I appreciate the Adirondacks Council and the Adirondacks experience for reaching out to us and talking about a way that we can actually work to look at new places and discover our legacy and our history. And especially when we talk about climate solutions, they often fail to leverage the experience of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And it stops short of repairing the legacy of the health, economic, and quality of life inequities that are exacerbated by fossil fuel economy. So it's so important that we go to a place not only to rest and relax, but to strategize for the future about how our communities are going to look like. And in my experience, and under my leadership as chair of the caucus, I want to focus on that, environmental racism and environmental, fighting for environmental justice, and ensuring that our communities have access to appropriate healthcare. And so experience the Adirondacks not only, for its nature, but for its way that it protects our communities of color. The scientists who are there fighting to make sure that, they're beating back against the dirty fossil fuels that are coming from Ohio, or people like you, Aaron, who are just espousing that history and reminding us that this land is our land, and that we own it. And we need to protect it, but we also need to make sure that we're spreading that information, that it's there and accessible to all. And it's really important that we do that, because it's millions of acres of opportunity for us.
Benita?
Well, I mean, this is really important for me. It's something that I've committed my life to. I really want to make sure that we understand that we have a right to be in the Adirondacks. And many of us, associate the Adirondacks with the correctional facilities that are up there. And many of us who've ever been to the Adirondacks have only been there to see someone in a correctional facility. And there's a lot more to it. I really see my role as giving folks access, providing them education about the history, about the ecology, and helping them just relax and enjoy this space, to even teach citizen science, to encourage people to be leaders and be able to come up and access the space, give their children access to the space. There's just so much that we could be doing here in terms of our communities having access to the Adirondacks. And I think I'm one of the vehicles that can help get people there. And that's what I've been doing over the years. And I've also, I had an intern this summer she's a Brown student, Brown University student, but she lives in the Capital Region, and she interned with me, and she'll be a future leader that will bring people up into the Adirondacks. I've also helped another young person become an outdoor Afro leader, so that she is now bringing people up to the Adirondacks. She's a summit steward for the Adirondack Mountain Club. Through these partnerships and through, people have come to me and opened up doors for me to be able to bring folks up to get different kinds of experiences. Because once we touch this place, see this place, it gets into our heart, it gets into our souls, and it cleanses us, and we need this. So I'm looking forward to all the different ways that I can connect people to the Adirondacks, because it enriches everyone. It helps our state, and we have every right to be there.
One of the things that we did this year with the learning journey, and again, this is not only educating our legislators, but also all the greater community of New York State with regards to, the roles, because a lot of folks don't know or aware of the intersectional history of the Adirondack Park and the various communities from the First Nations whose lands and ancestral lands this belong to, but to the First Nations, those who were enslaved, again, from the founding of this great country, but who built the roads and built many of the pathways that we come to take for granted. Or in the case, I'm glad that you mentioned it, Assemblywoman Zimmerman, with regards to voting rights in 1826 to the 1840s, how people of color, the first voting rights and voting suffrage movement and resistance was actually in New York State, not the South. Mm-hmm. And that the Adirondacks features significantly, in that regard. Speaking to history and speaking from the lens that you're at right now, Benita, where you're looking at the conversation, and both my legislative colleagues here, the national conversation, that's centered around replacement, nobody's being replaced, but this is a place that actually belongs to all of us. And how do we, connect with history in an intersectional way that really pulls our communities together, but more importantly, the opportunities right now with the legislature and Benita, through your outdoor Afro that you use in techniques in building community and actually pulling our communities together, whereby everybody can enjoy this resource, but also be empowered by the information they can learn from it.
So, I mean, for me, it's really important that, we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are people there who very rarely come in contact with people of color. And I think it's really, in order for us to I went to school with two young ladies who had never been around people of color. They were in the dorm room next door to me, and for a whole year, they wouldn't speak to me or any of the people of color on our floor. So after a year, every time we'd come into a lounge, they'd leave. This one time, the two girls were in the lounge, and I went in and I spoke to them, and I said, "Why is it every time we come in, you leave?" And they said, "Well, we were told things about you, and we've seen negative things about Black people on TV, and we don't feel safe around you guys because of what we've never been around you. We don't really understand you, and this is what we've been told about you." And it really made a difference, because once I'm talking to these young ladies, other people got up, were coming into the room where I was at. They were so glad that I was actually talking to them, and they weren't running away from us. But it really makes me reflect on, what we're trying to do in the Adirondacks. That whole experience that I had where, the kids in the Adirondacks don't get to interact with our kids. I think it's really important that in order to, people who live in the Adirondacks when they start seeing us come up there, they don't know anything about us. And we don't really understand them either. And I think that as we're going forward with some of the initiatives I have, I'd love to have our kids interacting with the kids there. I'd love to have the kids there come into New York City and see what life is like for the kids in New York City, so that we create some understanding, some empathy, and that we start to work together more. And not just the kids, but even the adults. I mean, how are we going to start to build this community that we really want to see happen in the Adirondacks if we don't have people talking to each other and interacting with each other? So we need to, we're seeing instances of hate, but I think it's because we're not engaging each other, and we're assuming things about each other. And many people don't even realize there's poverty in the Adirondacks. There's poverty in the Bronx. There's poverty in Queens. But I think if we start to talk about our lives and share with each other, we'll be able to move in a direction that will really help the Adirondacks. It'll help the communities that are not elsewhere in New York State. And that's something I'd like to see happen in the future.
Following on that thread, because you hit the nail right on the head, and I'm going to hit you, Assemblymember Solange, because one of the things that you and Assemblywoman Zimmerman worked on is the Timbuctoo pipeline that's connecting SUNY, State University of New York, which is SUNY's Environmental Science and Forestry College in the Adirondacks, with Metropolitan CUNYs, which is city universities. And it's getting exactly at that thing that Benita's lifting up, how using the academic bridge to connect these communities and connect upstate and downstate. How are we going to lift that up? That effort right now started, and carry it forward. But again, to help bridge and deal with some of the challenges that Benita has pointed to.
Yeah, definitely. When she was speaking, I was thinking exactly about the Timbuctoo pipeline, which the caucus has fought hard to enact. So we were able to invest an initial $2 million to start this pipeline, where we're taking young people from downstate in nature deprived zones, such as, the Bronx and Brooklyn, and bringing them into public spaces. There's like a statistic that says Black people of color are 3 times more nature deprived than any other, ethnicity. And so we built that pipeline for not only bringing young people up to the Adirondacks and showing them this beautiful nature preserve, but also to teach them about the jobs of the future. As I mentioned before, they're the scientists there. There are individuals who are up there, you know, pushing and living these green renewable jobs of the future. And our young people need to see it firsthand. You know how life is. You know, if you don't see it, if you don't feel it, you don't understand it. And I think you know, my colleague will agree. You know, the Adirondacks is one of those things you got to feel and see in order to really fall in love with it. And so we're creating that pipeline, that ability to transport our young people equitably into this space so that they can learn and grow. And if they want to live upstate, great. And if they want to, you know, get these jobs upstate, they have a pipeline to do so. But just bringing that knowledge and information back to their cohorts or to their community, that's how we community build and bring, you know, people of color back into the world of nature and remove that nature deprivation that they experience.
Assemblymember Zimmerman?
I mean, I agree with everything that was said, and I really just want to just put another, you know, topic on the table, and that's the equity. When you look at a inner city CUNY school compared to an upstate SUNY school, the resources, the ability to have advanced degrees, which Medgar Evers currently doesn't have, and give young people the opportunity through this $2.1 million grant to learn and from the same curriculum that is being taught across the state, but then the added value of having the connection and having the opportunity to go and visit and apply what they learn. Because if you're in the city and you're talking about clean water and clean air, and the ability to take cloud samples, that can't happen downstate. But through this program, through this funding, young people will have the opportunity to experience, and you know, and I think at least for at least three of us, we came up in the era when you got your first job, you were an apprentice under a master teacher. You had the opportunity for 2 weeks or, you know, 6 months to learn from a master in in the environment. And so I'm just excited about their opportunity to have the social exchange with other students, some of which will be in the same economic class, but others may not be. But their opportunity to travel outside of their environment and really build on that experience and have the ability to really use that in a way that makes them immediately employable. So I'm very excited about this project, as you can all tell.
One of the interesting histories of the state of New York, as you know, is that the Adirondacks has been one of the places where mass incarceration in the prison population has been the place where people were in prison, thereby creating a middle-class civil service of correction officers and their orientation, which are predominantly white, and the people of color, which in many cases that was, as Benita was pointing out, that they would interface with or you know, are incarcerated. So there's a very powerful dynamic that occurred for decades. And right now there's been an effort to shift away from the corrections economy to a much more diverse economy. And it has, you know, while that's the laudable goal, there's also the issue of just how you transition those jobs of corrections officers. And one of the things we talked about was going from corrections officers to conservation officers. In other words, creating that whole new pathway, but also double and diversify. Because again, going back on that principle of intersectional equity and inclusion, we have a chance to not only retool the need for more conservation officers and park rangers, but the field experience that they're going to need, which is in the Adirondacks. And as you know, young professionals from New York City, if they don't have a Timbuctoo jobs pipeline or nexus such as that, they won't have that experience to compete for these jobs. Anchor that with the history of knowing that places like Raybrook, which is now, you know, which is a prison site, but it once was one of the Black suffrage settlement. It was a place of liberations to incarcerations. How do we start to advocate, you know, now for perhaps retooling these places that are shutting down to perhaps become, the just transition or the workforce development centers that we need for the 21st century. So the new future jobs are going to be jobs that are going to be anchored to the environment, the climate, but also New York State expanding its green infrastructure. And we want to make sure that workforce is diverse, but we have these places, these prisons that we're closing down. Do we have an opportunity to retool these places to be workforce development centers and that job pipeline linking not only the communities within the park from a just transition standpoint, but also opportunities for residents from all around the state and from the various communities in which you right now serve? And since you work on workforce development, Assemblywoman Zimmerman, your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think absolutely. I think if you look at a lot of these towns, these one industry towns, they will die off if we do not diversify. When we think about how expensive it is now to live in New York City, people are going to need somewhere to go, but they can't just go to live in a place if they don't have a way to sustain themselves.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most successful, models for workforce development, as you all know, is to marry education and that curriculum with an employer.
Mm-hmm.
And we already have the green infrastructure. We've committed to our, climate act and reaching our sustainability goals. And so we've put those things forth. So whether it's wind, whether it's solar, whether it's growing food and soil, which you think, it's the
big farmer
my
economy
other
up here.
thing. Absolutely. And of course, the preservation work. This is an opportunity for us to utilize those spaces as satellite training institutes, as again, having a place to actually learn in real time, where you are not just book learning, but you can go to a farm, you can go to a waterways, you can have access to these things in real time in order to qualify for these positions. And we're going to do all that we can to get as many kids from downstate into that pipeline, but then also our returning citizens, also our elders who are looking for encore careers as well. I mean, there really is opportunity to put New York to work, all of New Yorkers to work in the green industry. And we have the land and we've got the resources to do it, but we just have to, and Mikhail knows that, make that case and go into the legislature and make it happen.
All right, Leader Solage, I'm going to have to twist your finger a little bit here, because again, part of that is getting civil service, Department of Corrections, DEC, the governor, and all these folks in the same room and saying, look, we got these civil service items that were prisons, but now we need to migrate them to become conservation officers, park rangers, and we want to diversify that. How do we engage in that conversation saying, listen, we're transitioning to a green economy. The Adirondacks and Catskills and throughout New York State needs this new infrastructure of trained professionals, and we have the population that the workforce that needs to be developed. So how do we get them in the room, to make that Green New Deal, those Green New Deal jobs and that workforce at scale to make wilderness protection, wilderness preservation, but even improve trails and infrastructure for the towns and communities that are here right now?
It's almost as difficult as getting off our dependency on fossil fuels. It's really, getting off the fossil fuel subsidies, it's really a challenge for all governments. And, getting us into renewables is something that, it takes political will. It's the same thing, getting off our reliance on mass incarceration and going into, a society and a state in which we value social justice and tackling the root causes of crime and public safety is something that we need to do as a society. And so my suggestion, as you said, is to bring all those people in the room and have a conversation. I think that individuals who are in those positions of law enforcement and civil service, they care just about, about having good wages and giving back to their community. And that's why they serve in that capacity. And so reminding them that they could be a part of the, the climate core, they could be a part of that, the group of individuals that bring us and herald us into the future. And, whether we have to, push it policy wise or budget wise, I think we can get there. I think conversation, can be had, and reminding them that these climate jobs are also good paying union jobs as well. And providing that additional education, that additional support, wraparound services for the individuals who are transitioning into these new jobs will help us get there. So, I know, many individuals are excited about the new way to do that. And we also have a bond referendum that's on the back of the ballot that I tell people, if you haven't gone and vote, don't forget to flip the ballot. And I'm here in my official capacity, so I can't tell you which way to go.
Right.
But, but Proposition 1 is something that I think we should support, because that will help enable us to fund this new transition. I was sitting down with National Grid, and they're always telling me, how are we going to fund this transition? The same way we're going to fund, the new jobs of the future, by investing our monies into what's right and what could be used to improve our communities.
Well,
I want to just add one quickly
sure, go ahead.
to that as well. So we actually passed legislation that says if that any money that is coming to a state, when we do the census, it has to go to the last address. And when in the past, it used to go to whatever your current address was, which meant that a lot of upstate towns actually ended up getting funding based on population. And once that law changed, and the funding is now going back to where people lived before they were incarcerated,
Right,
means that people are losing revenue.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be, that is going to set the stage to bring people to the table, because they're going to be looking for resources and other opportunities for their upstate folks. And this will be a way to get them in the room. And I'm just glad that you brought up the Prop 1, because I want you all to know that I used my footage from when we were on the boat on the lake to underscore why that was that's such an important measure to vote on.
She was on Mirror Lake, and she was pushing for the Bond Act from that beautiful experience in the Adirondacks on Mirror Lake. And Benita, one of the critical pieces that you also can chime in on this, I mean, while you're not the legislator setting the table and for the conversation of, how do we create that green workforce, one of the things that your experience in hiking, traveling, and, as I say, enjoying the Adirondacks is the shortage of housing. And one of the big pieces, we cannot have workforce development if we don't have places for people to live, and affordable places for people to live. Your experience in your travels with Outdoor Afro, and just knowing the community through your work with John Brown Lives, the need and the poverty needs relative to affordable housing in the Adirondacks, and how perhaps, as we're talking about workforce and development and training people, but what we must consider, and your thoughts on, again, looking at APA that has to deal with zoning, providing the place and space and conversation with town supervisors with regards to how do we set up for affordable housing, within the Adirondacks to support the workforce of tomorrow.
Yes. Honestly, when I worked for the New York State Health Department, I mean, just to see, for all the years I've been there, housing's been an issue. And so I've met people who live in places that have dirt floors or sleeping in their cars, who have, several generations of a family in a home. So I know this is imperative. And, there are people who work in the park, who commute from Malone. They might drive 30 miles, just to get to work, with gas prices the way they are. I mean, and then housing being scarce. There are a lot of people who don't live in the park, who commute in the park for jobs. So this is really important. And I really hope that I can play a strong role in, supporting better housing, affordable housing within the park. Because even now, I mean, all summer long, a lot of the places that need staff can't even hire staff because they have nowhere for them to stay. there's no affordable housing. And with Airbnbs, a lot of the housing that was existing doesn't exist anymore because people are, turning their places that they would have rented out to Airbnb. So I fully understand this. I absolutely feel that we're in a critical time right now where, we want to attract people to the Adirondacks. We want to create jobs in the Adirondacks, but if they can't afford to live there, we're just shooting ourselves in the foot.
Assemblymember Zimmerman, how do we avoid shooting ourselves in the foot? How do we get, the governor, the towns, the communities together to seriously talk about just two pieces? We definitely want to talk about the jobs and jobs that are necessary, the 21st century Green New Deal workforce development. How do we get people into the room, commissioners of labor, et cetera, and the towns to say, listen, you got a very unique situation relative to how lands are managed, but we need to have a conversation about affordable housing. And I say that because a lot of people throw it out there as if that's the issue. The real issue right now, a lot of land is being bought up by commercial consumers. You can't stop people from buying Airbnbs. So the issue right now is, helping them with appropriate zoning to help provide the capacity needs and the guaranteed needs for affordable housing. So we don't want to have, like in New York City, where you have a high rise, it says it's going to develop affordable housing, but the devil's in the details of how you define affordable housing, right? All of a sudden to them, affordable housing requires you to have at least $200,000 a year in income. How do we seriously get folks to come together and say you can't set the market, but we have to work with folks to come up with these affordable housing guarantees? Because again, you can't complain about something if you're not trying to solve it. So how do we pull the folks together to deal with the housing crisis? Because it is a legitimate crisis, definitely statewide, but it becomes more acute given the special regulatory environment of the Adirondacks. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. Well, I think, last year, we passed legislation that was very important where we could actually repurpose hotels and other, office spaces that were not in use anymore and to repurpose them as housing. So I think that that's a step in the right direction. I think the thing that we have not been able to adjust for is what is affordable, right? The federal law and the area median income basically makes most neighborhoods now unaffordable. And so we have been having conversations about how do we adjust that on the state level? While the feds are trying to figure it out, can we create a community median income so that we can drive the costs down? Certainly, our Department of Community and Housing Renewal is looking to preserve the housing that they have and ensure that we can provide home ownership opportunities for people so that people aren't in this constant rental cycle. And those are just three things that I'm thinking about in terms of policies that we need to ensure that people are taking advantage of, because a lot of times we pass legislation and we pass so much at the same time, people don't know about it, and so they can't take advantage of it. So doing a better job of rolling it out, but also looking at other policy measures. And it's going to take all of us. We all know that housing is the #1 social determinant of health. And if you are not properly housed, you cannot be successful in your life. And you certainly cannot be of assistance to this great state that we live in. And so we're going to need all stakeholders at the table and making that our #1 priority going forward.
Is there a way to attract federal funds to, in this particular case, since it's a rural area and we have all of these issues, federal funds to subsidize more housing in rural areas?
Well, I would say yes. I think that we're looking at city, state, and federal. We need to make sure that our first responders and our essential workers are taken care of. Our environment is essential. We have proven that at least on at least one side of the aisle, we've proven that the environment is essential to our livelihood. And so that is something that we need to make a stronger case for and say, if we need a workforce to do this work in a particular area, they need to have housing. And how do we make that a priority using that as the standard?
I'm going to lean into Assemblymember Solange in that, okay, we have the investment, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a big pot of federal money. I know it's going to be throwing it out the door. How do we get some of that conversation, looking at, you know, the need with regards to climate, first line emergency people. So we're going to need those emergency workers, those park rangers, those conservation officers, but they need housing. Educators, the schools here need housing. So is there a way that we can start to have a broader conversation with the, in the community on how do we finance this and start to, as I say, when that money comes in, Adirondacks are also very critical. It is our green jobs infrastructure home.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny, people always call it the Inflation Reduction Act, but it was really a climate and healthcare bill. And they should call it the Climate and Healthcare Act, really.
Sounds much better.
It sounds much better. I mean, but I guess, politics. It's really important that we are fighting for those monies. So I know that there's currently a discussion about what the definition of disadvantaged communities are. And so when we talk about these disadvantaged communities, we also need to intertwine the fact that these communities need access to housing. And so, I think this is a great conversation that can be had. And when we discuss the allocation of monies, we should be setting aside monies for housing, especially for communities outside of New York City, because there is a giant issue when it comes to housing stock. On Long Island, we have the issue of NIMBYism. So people don't, NIMBY is not in my backyard. So people don't want to build housing in their backyard. And more in the rural upstate, I think there's an opportunity to build sustainable, environmentally friendly housing. We just have to organize ourselves as communities, and we need to find spaces and places where we can put it in. And then when the conversation comes with allocation, we can advocate for it.
And that's why I think part of that Adirondack Park Agency reform and efforts that I know that Benita is going to be probably an ear and listening to and making that happen. Because again, not only do we need the housing, but it needs to be within that legislative rubric and framework that is uniquely the Adirondacks. I want to pivot because we got about 5 minutes. The science, because the science is critical to not only what the Adirondacks is about. It's one of the nation's largest carbon sequestration areas. It's basically, our natural gift that pulls carbon out of the atmosphere. This past legislative caucus retreat, you saw how that science, that frontline science, is what the Attorney General relies upon when they're trying to hold states that burn fossil fuels accountable. This is the place whereby the baseline measures that we protect those of us who are vulnerable to asthma. You saw some of the sophisticated equipment that is there, but you also saw the fact that we need to actually not only better invest in the science, but also protect the assets, because as you know, it's pretty much on a shoestring. And I know that you are kind of shocked to see that the Adirondack Survey Lake Court, scale project is in a little trailer, rinky-dink trailer that's, it kind of, on one level, you're proud of the science that they do, the best in the country, the best in the world class. But can we do better, Assemblywoman Solange? And should we do better?
I don't know if the people on this call have seen the conditions, but I was taken back because when we think about the fight for climate justice, you would think that we'd be pouring resources. They would have the latest and greatest technology, but they had machines that I think were older than me. And I know a lot of you usually think I'm young, but imagine many of these machines were very antiquated, and so. When we talk about, this drive that we all have to fight the climate crisis, fight environmental racism, and we see that these people are literally on a shoestring where they have one full-time staffer there when they used to have dozens. It's really reflective of how we, not as a state and as a country, are not taking this fight seriously, and that we need to be allocating the resources. So, I know for myself, I'm ready to advocate. I was happy enough to have the EPA regional director with us, a great friend of yours who took the time out to sit with the caucus and have conversations and build that bridge between federal and state. And so I know we're going to fight for more money from the feds, but also on a statewide level, we need to seriously have a conversation about why we're not investing into fighting the climate crisis. It's appalling when we're investing into frivolous economic development projects when we have an actual crisis on hand and we're not allocating resources. So I definitely think that we're going to fight for at least get them out of the trailer, or get them some modern equipment. I think it's the bare minimum, but I know my colleagues, my colleague could expound on that.
Right. I think it's one of probably the most significantly hidden EJ aspects is the fight for the science and the science behind the injustice to fight. The only way you can fight injustice is having the data and having the science. And I want to add that, to have a Latina and Afro-Caribbeana sitting up on the top, the cloud catching of Mount Marcy, that was just a beautiful thing. And, y'all are now sisters of the mountain. But, Assemblymembers Zimmerman, your thoughts on the science and how we need to invest as a critical EJ, part of your EJ portfolio for the caucus in basically the science that, it's not sexy, but it's.
Science is sexy.
Well,
Science is definitely sexy.
all right.
I like that. Yeah.
No, absolutely. We need t-shirts. We need t-shirts
there
to say that.
There we go.
But to your point, when we were in the trailer, when we were trying to all crowd into the trailer to listen to the scientists, to walk in their shoes, the first thing I thought about was, how are we going to get a class in here? How are they going to learn? And if they don't have the room. And so this is, again, when we talk about where employers of the future can be helpful. There are many tech companies that are funding STEAM education in elementary schools. They need to be our partners in this work, because you can't go from a wonderful computer lab that has drones and everything at your disposal in school, and then go
in the real world,
into college, into the real world, and you're dealing with a machine that was built in 1979. So we definitely need those that partnership. We need that corporate responsibility to understand that they need to be a partner within with us, with government, right? So I'm not excluding us with the Adirondack Park to make sure that it is a 21st century program.
Sister Benita, again on the science, but from another point, a heart healthy issue. We have a chronic disease epidemic of diabetes, heart, cardiovascular disease, and et cetera within our community because of sedentary activity. Getting our communities to get access to this park and get access to the trails and be part of this wonderful thing, and how that can start to deal with some of the chronic disease, health crisis, and health disparities in our community. Again, the science behind that, but also the science to now get our communities transported to this wonderful resource to actually start dealing with the issues that are the threats to risk to public health.
So, I mean, this is just a great opportunity for people to start to breathe in fresh air, to relax, to clear their minds, to and I'm a dietitian, so believe me, when I offer snacks, I talk about nutrition and health and what they should be doing. So they're getting a full package. They're getting the environmental justice piece, they're getting the history piece, they're learning about ecology, and they're learning about nutrition. I don't let them get away with any of it. And you can be sure when I offer snacks, I do not offer junk. I offer healthy snacks. And yeah, you won't get it from me. But I talk about our history and our health history. And I talk about how we have eaten certain foods that in order to survive, but we need to, and that's part of comfort, that's comfort food to us, but we have to do it in moderation. I do not vilify any food.
Right.
I don't vilify the foods that we've eaten as comfort foods, but I do encourage people, I let them know the hazards of eating high fat, high salt, high sugar foods. And then I encourage them to, look, do it in moderation. And I encourage them to to make gradual changes to increase the variety in their diets. Because, when someone gives you a drastic diet, you're not going to stick with it.
What's
So
the best?
I try
What's
to
the best?
encourage them.
What's the best snack for that 1 mile, 2 mile, 3 mile hike?
Pardon me?
I said, what is the best food for that 1 to 3 mile hike?
The best food? Well, I mean, you need a little fat, you need some protein, and you need some carbs for quick energy. So it really depends on what you like to eat. I'd never tell someone, I don't know that there is a best food, but because it really depends on your taste. But
Well,
you need all of that in moderation: carbs, protein, fats in moderation, and yeah, you need the carbs for the quick energy. And
well, as I said,
protein, huh?
we definitely got to have the trail though, right? We got to have that 1 to 3 mile trail loop, correct?
Yeah.
Well, listen, we're wanting to wrap up and get everybody's thoughts. And again, closing on the history. And one of the great things about working with the Adirondack experience is that the need for a permanent exhibit of people of color within the Adirondacks. And we've been pulling together the pieces of history behind me. You see Timbuctoo, which basically is part of North Elba, which actually goes from John Brown's Farm all the way up to downtown Lake Placid on Mirror Lake. But there's all these other pieces, and we right now need a place that's going to be carrying forward a very significant exhibit. Your thoughts on a permanent exhibit, at the Adirondacks or within the Adirondacks that basically pulls in all of our culture, but specifically African American culture?
I'll go first. Enthusiastically, yes. It should have been done yesterday. We need a space and place for us, for our community, and we need to make sure that it's a modern space that's sustainable and accessible to all, and that has access, whether it's vehicular or transit. It's accessible for our communities who are historically been deprived of our land to have. So, you have my commitment, you have the caucus commitment to push for this, because it should have been done a long time ago, but now is the best time to get it done.
Zimmerman?
Absolutely. Well, two things. When I first visited John Brown's farm and I was walking through the exhibit, and I saw the installation for Dr. James McCoon Smith and Dr. Peter Ray, both of whom were also founders of Weeksville, again, which is in my district, and who are buried in the Greenwood Cemetery, which every year I do a tour for, they call African American Notables Tour, and we would visit their grave. And that history is so important for people to go and visit and hear the stories and know that they were founders of Weeksville. So my task now is to connect you with Dr. Raymond Codrington, who's the new executive director at Weeksville, because in his archives, it's just a treasure trove that could be used to help start the museum that will house the Adirondack history. I see sister sharing going on between institutions, but you're absolutely right, Michael and Aaron, we must tell our own story. We cannot allow our history to be erased. I know you've all had the same experience. You're excited about the Adirondacks, the Adirondack Park, the Timbuctoo project, and you talk to people about Timbuctoo and they said, I think I've heard of that, right? But they're thinking about
West Africa.
And they really, and immediately, this is the reason why Benita's buses are always so filled, because as soon as people hear about it, they want to go and they want to experience. So we absolutely need to codify that in a place and space there so people can continue to learn for generations to come.
Benita?
I'm just excited that we're all talking and we're together and we're on the same page, and we really want to make this happen. So thank you for being here. Thank you for all that you do to support us and believing in what we're doing.
That's really critical. And I just think it's a very perfect note. And again, the critical points that we've covered, everything from, jobs, workforce development. We talk about the transitioning of corrections facilities to workforce development centers. We're talking about funding the science, which is very critical. The investment in the science that's going to basically help us in the fight against climate change, but also that's protective of our health, but also the need to record place, space, and memory, and pulling that together. I want to thank our fine panelists this evening that have come together and shared their thoughts, but more importantly, so that all of our listeners who are tuning in right now can see some of the fine faces in leadership from around the state that are making truly this park, all of our park, the Adirondacks. This is a park for all, a place for all, a space for all, and more importantly, caring about the communities within the park as well as the love for the communities outside the park that need to connect it. I want to probably cue back in one of our hosts, Eric Reardon. And again, Eric, thank you in the Adirondack experience. And also I want to thank my generous organization, the Adirondack Council, for the opportunity to network and as well as to be a collaborator in this important space for this important conversation. Eric?
Thank you so much. On behalf of the Adirondack Experience, the Adirondack Diversity Initiative, the Wild Center, the Nature Conservancy, I want to extend our gratitude to Benita Law-Diao, to Aaron Mair, to Assemblywoman Zimmerman, to Assemblywoman Solage. We just so appreciate you taking the time to share your experience and share the very important work you are all doing to create a more accessible, inclusive, and equitable Adirondack Park. I would just mention that all of the project partners are continuing to find new opportunities for public programming around these critical themes. And so please stay tuned as we continue this effort into the future. And once again, just thank you so much for the audience for being with us here tonight. Thank you so much, all our panelists. We hope you have a great weekend. And I think I could say everyone would agree, please go vote this coming Tuesday. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening.
Don't forget to flip the ballot.
Flip the ballot. That's right.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.